There it goes.
Hey, good
Okay.
evening, everyone. This is Terry Wood from Pokerrailbird.com. Welcome to our stream tonight. We've got some special guests for you. I'm joined by two people tonight who are going to bring very different but equally valuable perspectives to the game. You've likely encountered our first guest through his books. He wrote one of the most influential series ever written on poker behavior, Reading Poker Tales, Verbal Poker Tales, and Exploding Poker Tales, all of which have been translated into several different languages. He's also the creator of Reading Poker Tales training series, which I personally am a member of, and I refer to it a lot in my research and stuff that I work on for my videos. His insights have been featured everywhere from the New York Times to the Psychology of Poker podcast. He's right. He has other issues that he works on. He's also the leader of the People Reading People podcast, and his name is Zachary Elwood. Zachary, welcome to the podcast tonight. I appreciate you coming on.
Hey Terry, thanks for having me again. Pleasure to join you.
We also have Beth Blevins. This is her second time. Beth and I did a live stream last week. She's AKA the dealer. So Beth has been pitching me cards for about over a decade, I guess now.
Yeah.
And I've had the privilege and, of course, sometimes the pain of seeing her skills, not just as a dealer, but as a sharp strategic player as well. She's claimed a few of my chips over the years. She's a 20-year veteran of the poker world. Beth has probably dealt more hands than any of us will ever see. She's had a front row seat to every type of player, from the tightest knits to the loudest table poker bullies, and she's been able to develop a deep understanding of the psychology that unfolds on both sides of the felt. Tonight, she'll bring the dealer's perspective to our conversation. Beth, thanks for taking the time. I know you could be with your family tonight, but I appreciate you being here.
Hi, everybody. I'm glad to be here.
Many of you may know, if you saw some of the posts I put out over the last couple of weeks, that we solicited questions for Zachary and Beth to an email address. We have some of those. We'll get to those a little bit later on. We've also opened up chat, so you can start putting your questions into chat if you have any. And so let's just get started. So, Zachary, I got an interesting story here. So, a few weeks ago, I was in a game where Beth works, and the guy that was sitting directly across, I'm in seat 9, he's right across from me, and he lost, I don't know, about $1,200 in 2 hours in a 1-3 game. Of course, we're at this place, I won't call the name out because Beth works there, but it's a no cap buy in. So a lot of the buy ins for a 1-3 game were $1,000, $1,200, $1,500. So at any rate, he lost it, and I'm talking to him. He was not a bully, but he raised every hand, he called everything, he played everything. And I mean, I was in a hand with him. And earlier, he had stated to me, "Well, the cards don't matter. It's a psychological game. It doesn't matter what I got." So I'm in a hand. I hit a set of kings on the turn, I think. And at any rate, I felt him. And not being sarcastic, I just asked him. I said, "I can't call his name, but I call his name." And I said, "Your cards matter now." He said, "No, they don't matter." So I just like to get your perspective on people that think it's 100% psychological game.
Well, poker is an interesting game because it's easy for people to reach all sorts of conclusions about how to play it and about their own skill levels. And that's why it can be, that's why it can be profitable, because I think people can convince themselves of a wide range of things, because it's hard to exactly map over your strategies and approaches to the results, right? So I would say, I mean, there's a lot of ways to parse that question, but I would say, you know, math and fundamental strategy are hugely important. Psychology is important, but it's, a person who has a good fundamental strategy is going to win versus somebody who very much lacks a fundamental strategy. So, you know, that is the math part of it. And, maybe math's a good fundamental strategy involves learning the math and learning, kind of game theory sort of optimal solutions, even if they're not that advanced. But I would say that the psychology part, and there's a few aspects to psychology as well. It's, psychology. I'd say the most important part of what somebody might call the psychology part of poker is uh, trying to understand opponent player dynamics, like what they're capable of, what they, for example, whether somebody's, at a simplistic level, whether they are very tight, very loose, do they bet a lot, do they fold a lot. So if you call that psychology, that's very important, because that can be, you can have a pretty bad fundamental strategy, and if you key into some of these basic player tendencies, you can do pretty well for yourself, just recognizing some, player tendencies. But then you got the psychology element of the tells aspect, which is another level on top of that. And he was probably talking about, I'd imagine he was talking about like reading the player, what they're capable of, and these kinds of things, which is important. But I would say, yeah, you're not going to go very far if you, and as I say in my books, I always make sure to qualify in my books that even though I write about tells and psychology, the fundamental strategy is just so much, the biggest part of the game. Like, you're not going to get anywhere. The tells and the psychology part should be sort of the icing on the cake of learning the fundamental strategies aspect. But yeah, I think a lot of people get too attracted to the kind of the sexy part of the game of like, I'm going to read people really well and really put them on a hand. But like, that only, that's cool and all, and is valuable, but it only goes so far, because you're often not going to know where you're at in a hand from, reading a player tendency or reading their tells or whatever.
Yeah, I recall in your Verbal Poker Tales book, early on in the book, you mentioned that some of the newer and less experienced players were putting more reliance into tails than what you would recommend.
Yeah, for sure. I actually went back and added. I actually added like a year after I published, because I do occasional revisions, and I went back and realized I should have made it more clear in the beginning just how rare it can be to actually rely on a tell, right? Because I think I'd given the impression, unintended at the beginning, that like I was frequently reading people like all the time, and it's like, so I made it very clear, like, hey, I might only be basing a decision on a tell like a few times a session, and sometimes they're like kind of minor decisions too. They're not even like major decisions that might just veer me one way or another slightly. So I wanted to make it clear to people, like, don't get the impression that me or like a Phil Ivey is like, often basing decisions on reads alone or something.
Right.
So
Right.
what are you seeing? Do you think the table has a like a math psychology balance, or is it out of balance?
Um, First off, I think the most successful players use a combination of the both. I think that they rely mostly on math, but like you said, use the being able to read people, being able to read their tells to make your ultimate decision. Probably, 4 or 5 times a session. Probably, maybe not that much. Maybe a little bit more. Somewhere around there. But um, in my opinion, though, I think that usually players rely on one or the other. That, like I said, the most successful players that I see rely on both. But I think that a lot of players, newer players coming in, they picked up a book or they listened to a video, and they are relying on just one or the other, just the math fundamentals, or they're relying on just the psychology. So I think I see a lot of that of them using just one of them.
Yeah, I do too. But I mean, in my opinion, it's it's predominantly. I mean, I like the psychology part. I study it a lot, but it's still the math that drives the
Yeah,
whole
the
game.
math should drive it, but the psychology part's the fun part, though, because when you get
Yeah.
when you get it right, you're like, yes, that's like one of the best feelings ever. It's like, yeah,
Yeah.
you're thinking you're making a hero call, but it's actually the right call, and yeah, so
That's
yeah,
Yeah, that's
that's
the
a great,
exciting. That's the
yeah,
exciting part. I mean, that's what got me into poker when I was young, was the
yeah,
psychology aspect of it. It's like, sure, you got to have the strong fundamental strategy part, but that's like the less fun part of it. That's like the hard work,
hmm,
studying part of it. Whereas like the
exactly,
softer skills can be a little bit more exciting and make you feel like,
exactly.
oh, I
That's
did
what gets your
something
heart
that
going.
most people wouldn't do there. That's very exciting, right?
Yeah, you're exactly right. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's the exciting part of it.
yeah.
So what do you see it different? I mean, would you say that the tails and the psychology part is plays a bigger role if you're 25-50 or 50-100 game than it would be in a 2-5 or a 1-3 game?
Well, I think the interesting thing is, it can play the psychology and the tells can play a big role in different contexts. Like it can play a big role if you're playing, like, say, really bad players who have all sorts of tells, and that can be one way it plays a big role. But I know it can also play a role in high stakes games where players are playing very well versus each other, and so you're just looking for like small pieces of information that might lead you one way or another. So, I don't play high stakes myself. The highest I played mostly was like 5-10 no limit. That was my regular, higher game. But I've talked to higher stakes players, like much higher stakes players, about this, and they talk about the element of when you're playing people who are very skilled and very balanced. It might not take much behavior to get you to go one way or another, because if you think an opponent is very balanced and you get something that you think means is slightly goes one way or another, you can act on it feeling pretty good that you're, in the long run, you're going to, profit off that. If you feel like it's a reliable tell, say, somebody's, you get a sense from their eye contact or something that they're weak or strong, and that leads you to call or fold based on that. It doesn't have to be that powerful or reliable tell for you to, if say it's like 60% reliable or something. It's like that can be quite powerful if you're frequently playing with the same players, over and over, and getting that, getting that benefit. So yeah, I'd say it can be quite powerful in different ways. Yeah, if that makes sense.
Yeah, perfect sense. Yeah. So, in your opinion, what do you think drives the poker bullies? I'm not talking about just somebody that's aggressive or maybe even overly aggressive. I'm talking about these guys. I was in a game the other night. I was telling Beth about it. It's been 2 or 3 weeks now. But, there's this guy in there, and he's raising 15, 20 times big blind pre-flop every hand. And then after the flop, he continues, with this same process. I mean, eventually, what happened to him, but but what drives that? Why would somebody come in there and take a 1-3 game and start betting $60 pre-flop?
Well, I mean, I think there's probably different motivations. I would guess a good number of people like that are just, I would hope they have a good amount of money, and they're just like, having fun with being the center of attention, and they like the excitement and like being the bully, like being dominant. Maybe they even if they lose a good amount, it can be fun, and maybe they're getting something out of it, in the excitement, and maybe they can afford it. I'd say, other times it might just be somebody's kind of delusional about like how well they do with that strategy. Maybe they had some good short term, doing well with that strategy, and they actually think like, hey, I can really bully everybody like this, and I can actually do well with this. It can be, I think it can be a range of things, but I'd say those are probably the top two, I'd imagine.
If you were in a game with someone like that, how would you play them?
Yeah, that's my question for you.
Yeah, and that's a commonly asked. If you can find a lot of threads on poker forums about this kind of question, because it's such a common thing that comes up. And one of the few times I've played in the past couple of years was at a low stakes home game where there was one guy, playing like that, just crazy, because it was a low stakes home game, so he was just going pretty wild. And so it's a common question. I think the most common correct answer is, you want to loosen up a little bit, but still be, you don't want to go crazy. You don't want to join them in going crazy, right? But you do want to loosen up enough where you're going to be, if there's somebody mixing it up with him, you're liable to be the one who's taking his chips. Because I think that, there can be some people will play a little, they'll just keep playing their standard kind of tight strategy, but I think you have to, if you want to try to take advantage of a player like that, you kind of adjust and be willing to mix it up. And it means, it means it means you're going to have some higher variance, right? You're going to lose
Right.
a big pot or two or a few or many even. But you have to be, if you're willing to take that risk and know that you're liable to come out ahead versus those players, you just got to be willing to mix it up. But I think it also pays to pay attention to what kind of aggressive player it is, right? Because you have to pay attention to, like, are they really as loose as they seem? Are they continuing to fire, like on the turn, the river? Are they giving up a lot? Does it just seem like they're loose and aggressive, but are they being a little bit smart about it? Because I think what happens is you have to be careful that you're not being the sucker, because if they haven't shown multiple instances of being very unreasonable and loose, you have to be careful that you're not getting drawn into their perception, right? That maybe they're smarter than you think, and they're just creating the perception that they're loose, right? So you want to be sure, if you're mixing it up with somebody, that they really are making as bad missteps as you think they're making, and have some evidence for that.
Right. And that I see that a lot. I see that quite a lot as a player or as a dealer. The players, they sit down at the table and they start to act like the bully, but they really have more control than a lot of players realize they have. And me as a dealer, I recognize it, but other players don't, and they get involved and they end up getting stacked because they've gotten caught up in thinking this player's just a moron. They're just throwing money away.
Yeah, and that can be a value. I mean, I like to do that myself, and if I, because it can be quite easy to build a perception of being crazy. Like, people are like, "Whoa, he did that with one hand," but you have to remember, it was only one hand, and maybe I or the other, maybe somebody was purposely building that perception where they knew, like, hey, I might get away with it. In which case, maybe I'll show it to kind of build my perception that I'm crazy.
Right.
Or worst case, every once in a while I get called and look like a maniac, and maybe that's good for my perception long term, and then I'll play my more normal game. So it's worth thinking through, like, is this person maybe smarter than I think, or are they truly a maniac, right? So you have to try to judge that.
So you have to be able to change gears. Like I say that quite often. You have to be able to change gears. You have to be able to put the gas on and take the gas off in your game, but not make it shown to the other players. Like you need to start doing that, but not make it overly known that that's what you're doing, so that you're maximizing and you're not leaving money on the table. You're getting maximum value out of all your hands. So
are you seeing more of this as over, say, versus a year ago or 5 years ago, or is it just the same? Because I think like I see more of it.
I don't think I see more. The place that I deal at, we have a lot of regulars, and we have our regular players that act like that all the time. We have probably 4 or 5 that, it's really funny when they come in and they sit at a game, then you see all the other players get up and go put their name on the list for a transfer to that game, But a lot of the times the players that they're doing that to are not players they're really not throwing their money away. They're loose, aggressive players, and they might seem like a bully, but they're not really. So I think that it may seem like you see more of that, but I think it's more controlled than people think it is. I think that it's players are doing it on purpose. I don't think that it's
definitely.
Yeah, I don't think. Yeah, I don't. It's definitely by design. It's not. They're just going there and just throwing money away. They know what they're doing. They're using the psychology to make their table image like that. So I think that's. I think that happens more often than the moron that's in there just throwing money away.
Right.
Well, if you're just joining us, welcome to the Pokerrailbird live stream. We're live with Zachary Elwood and Beth Blevins, talking about poker psychology behavior. We've got our chat lined up now. We'll be accepting questions, and if you're just joining us, you can fire your questions in there, and we'll get to them shortly. So, Zachary, in reading Poker Tales, you mentioned that, and we had talked about this before the stream started, you kind of stepped away from poker, playing professionally, because it takes, well, maybe not because of, but you were referring to it takes certain psychological traits to endure that lifestyle. what would you say those traits are, and how many of the players do you see that really have those traits?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's hard to speak generally about it. I can only speak for myself, really. But I mean, the reason I never really pursued becoming I played for a living for like 3.5 years as my main source of income, but I never really wanted to be like that. I never wanted that to be my job. Like I
Right.
didn't pursue it. I didn't move to Vegas to move up in stakes or anything like this. I moved to Portland, Oregon to kind of get out of the lifestyle because I didn't want to pursue it. And there were a number of factors there. I mean, for one thing, I've always been a pretty anxious person, so I didn't handle the swings very well. I didn't handle like the lifestyle very well. Like when I was, you know, I think a lot of people can relate to this. Like I handled it was hard, it can be hard to it can be anxiety producing to go through losing streaks, even if you're like on an upward streak overall, like you're doing well overall. It can still be hard to handle a bad session or a bad few sessions.
Right.
I never really got good at handling that and being like keeping an even keel emotionally. That was never easy for me. That was one aspect. And then also I never really wanted to play poker for a living anyway. It was like I never wanted to study. I was always interested in the
Right.
psychology and the tells part, but I never really wanted to sit down and study like the ranges and the best fundamental strategies. Like I learned how to do those things naturally, but I never wanted to like study it, which I knew was required to do well at poker. Right? If you really want to get good, you got to devote yourself to these more kind of game theory optimal, thinking through the game more at a really granular level. And I never really wanted to do that. I was interested in the softer skills. And then, yeah, I also kind of didn't like the aspect of it felt like a lot of the people you meet in the poker world were quite shady and, you know, uh, either like kind of arrogant about their skills or like also kind of sad and you meet a lot of kind of people that have gambling problems and it kind of makes you feel bad for taking their money and these kinds of things. So there were a number of things that added up to me not wanting to really pursue it, and kind of giving up on it and just doing it on the side occasionally. uh, and I do think, to your question, I do think there are a lot of people that are fundamentally probably like me, where the anxiety aspect is not good for them, where it's just not a good fit for them. I think some people, have the so-called alligator blood, where you can keep an even keel and you don't really get affected by the swings and these kinds of things. And I was never like that. And I know, some people are just not temperamentally suited very well to it. Um, yeah, so there's that aspect, and I think some people just aren't good at really being like self-critical and being really willing to be really hard on themselves and say, and try to remove their ego completely from it and say, I always have more to learn. There's always more to learn, right? It's really hard to try to consistently always be examining yourself and trying to get better. That is really hard, and it really takes a certain kind of mentality too. And I like to think I had that part of it, but even looking back, I think there were moments early on when I was too full of myself and should have examined, my strategies more and gone back to the drawing board kind of thing. So it can be, there's a number of things that I think make this kind of lifestyle hard on people and hard to do, and the reason that few can do it at the high levels. Yeah.
Something and I don't know how you feel about this, but and you can tell me. I had a player tell me a long time ago that if you love poker, don't ever quit your job to play for a living, because then it becomes a job and it's not fun anymore. It takes the fun out of it, because now you have to learn to manage money. You have to be a lot more disciplined than you were before, when you just went in there and you could have a few drinks and play around, and if you dropped a few $100s, it was okay. It wasn't the end of the world. But and I don't know how you feel about that, but I sometimes always live by, and so therefore that's why I love the game. So I like dealing because I still get to be a part of the game, and I don't have to have anything at risk doing it.
Yeah, no, for sure. It's like I enjoyed poker much more when I was playing it on the side and I had another
Right.
source of income as my main income. Like it just, it just takes the pressure away. You can
Right.
enjoy it more, and it's like anything. If you do something, you take something you enjoy a lot, you start doing it for a living, it becomes a completely different situation, right?
Yeah.
The stress is on, and everything is much more stressful, multiplied, and you can lose your love of it, your appreciation for it in various
Right.
ways. But some people seem to, some people clearly love poker for very long periods of time, even
Yes.
playing, seriously, which is kind of hard for me to relate to be honest. Like but I think that's just a temperamental difference because I easily get kind of burnt out on things like that. Yeah.
It's funny that you mentioned shady characters. just before we
We were
started
just
the
talking
stream,
about yeah.
I was asking, well, where's this guy? Where's this guy? I haven't seen him in a long time. They just got out of jail.
We were talking about shady people. It's funny that you say that though, because there are some shady people in the business. Obviously, we've all seen them, but there really are some great people too that are just good, just honest to good, salt of the earth people that are just good people, and they're so you get both kinds in the poker world, definitely.
For
So I don't
sure.
want y'all think we're bad.
Yeah,
We're
I don't
bad
want
mouth
to. I'm not running down. It's more just it's just the yeah. There's good and bad people like in any
Yes,
endeavor. Yeah.
absolutely. Yes, I agree with that 100%.
So and I can't recall if it was reading poker tales or if it was in exporting poker tales, or maybe it was in both. But you talked a lot about. I remember, like it was kind of exact. You said if you don't get anything else out of this book, conceal your own tales.
Yeah. I mean that's the number one thing I think most people get out of my stuff if they only consume a little bit of it. Say they only read my first book or watch a few videos. That I most often hear people saying like, "Oh, I was doing that and I didn't know it until I watched your video or read your book." And I think the reason it's so much more valuable is because it can be kind of hard to get good at reading tells, but you can quickly learn how to limit your own tells and become less readable, right? Like it's a much easier lower bar to try to remove your own tells, and that makes a big difference because you could be playing strong players and you could be losing all sorts of money long term from these tells that you don't know you have. So you're there theoretically you're saving a lot of money limiting those tells of yours versus like trying to actually get good and at reading tells is a steeper learning curve, and you're going to have some be wrong and have some setbacks and take you a little while to learn that stuff. It's going to be valuable if you keep at it, but it's just a little longer learning curve. But yeah, I think that helps explain why.
Have
Uh,
you ever? Oh,
yeah.
I'm sorry. I
Oh,
went
go
kind
ahead.
of. Have you ever tried to add a tail in and see
False
if
tales.
yeah, false tails? I've never
Yeah,
tried that before, but
yeah. I mean, I occasionally have done that. I actually have a section. I think it's in reading poker tells. Yeah, it is. It explained my thinking behind when I think the situation lined up in order to try to give a false tell. I
okay.
think uh, I think people can try to do that too often, and I think it can it can kind of backfire or be not thought through because sometimes you're just kind of confusing yourself. You're not sure how they're going to react to the false tell. But I
Right.
think there are some things that I think when they're in place are good situations to try to do a false tell. So, for example, I would say if your opponent is if you think your opponent is pretty decent and is liable to understand some common tells, and if you think that they view you as a pretty amateur player, right? If you think that they're going to interpret your tells at kind of a first level, average player population meaning, then that can be a good situation, a good dynamic to try to get a false tell through. So, for example, It might be something like, you're in a tournament or something, and you think your opponent's decent or good, and you think that they view you as a sucker, as an amateur recreational player who's not very good. You might do some reverse tell where you're like, shove, on the flop, or wherever, whenever you go all in, and be like, oh, I guess I'm going home now, something like that. Sort of like this reverse tell
Yeah.
Setting up your
that you
chair,
often hear from people that don't mind getting called, and they
Right.
might, that person might be like, oh, what are the chances that this person I view as an amateur player would say that with a bluff, right? And that could be a good opportunity to try a bluff and say something like that many people would interpret as like, oh, he's actually quite comfortable, right? But yeah, I feel like those things have to be kind of aligned, because if they're not aligned, and say your opponent views you as pretty decent and tricky, it's not going to work, right? You have no idea how they're going to interpret that. So kind of like the dynamic has to align correctly, where, and I often try to portray, if I can, for as long as I can, I often try to portray like a more amateur kind of vibe, like,
Yeah, I try that too.
yeah, if I can
Later
do it
around.
until I can't get away with it anymore, until people are like, oh,
Right.
okay, he's clearly like pretty decent.
Right.
But I think there can be some benefits to being perceived as an amateur player, because you can do stuff like that and kind of fool people that are decent players.
Right.
I know you said you rarely played anymore, but when you do play, do people recognize you?
Very seldom. It happens occasionally, like it's happened in Vegas, but where people are, there's a few knowledgeable players in the game, but pretty infrequently. Like even people that know my stuff may not know what I look like. So
That's nice.
That's
yeah,
good.
That's
yeah,
very
it
That's
is.
good.
good.
No, I like
Yeah.
I like that. Yeah.
So, what do you see? Do you think at the tables where we play that players make a conscious effort to conceal their talent?
No, no, not in our place, not at all. Well, I say that. I mean, I pick up on the tells a lot because I deal to them daily, so I can pick them up a lot quicker than someone who's just sit down with a player for a few times. So, but no, most of our regulars, if they're talking too much, they don't have anything. If they're quiet, they've got the nuts. I mean, a lot of times at our place, it's pretty, for lack of a better word, elementary tales. They're tales that you not necessarily would have to read a book to pick out, and they're not trying to conceal them, because a lot of times they don't even realize that they have that tale. So
Like the one you caught me on?
yeah, like when I called him on one too, yeah, and he didn't even realize he had it, and I've been
Oh.
dealing with him for years and telling him about it. Yeah.
I thought I had all mine concealed.
You could be a consultant. You could be like, oh, pay me and I'll watch you for a while and then give you a consultation for
And
what I noticed.
love to do that. I would love to do that. Go and play.
Well, I know you consulted to a couple of WSOP Final Niners, right?
Yeah, you've coached, haven't you?
Yeah, my two big gigs for that were back in 2013 and 2015 for two World Series of Poker main event final table lists, Amir Lahavit and Max Steinberg. But that was back. The interesting thing about that was back when they had the several month delay between playing down to the final table. So they never, because they no longer have that. The reason that I was able to do that was because you had that delay we actually could study all the existing footage of the other players from that tournament and other tournaments that they were in too, other games that they were in, which gave you some interesting preparation time. But the fact that you no longer have that, there's no real gigs like that. Other people have paid me to analyze live stream footage that they were on a good amount and things like that.
And pick out their tails for them. That's really cool too.
Yeah, do some analysis for them. Yeah, of their patterns. Yeah.
Well, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Okay.
In reading Poker Tales, you talked a little bit about table image and how we can intentionally shape it and how we're perceived. So, how important do you think that table image is? And what are some of the things you could do to enhance your image?
Well, I can't, and you'll have to remind me if you think I'm missing something, but I don't think I have any firm prescriptions in that area, because I think depending on how people, I think the main thing is being aware of how you're perceived, right? Like, so if if my opponent thinks I'm just your average recreational player, they I think that I can get more bluffs through because they're less willing to give me credit for bluffs. They're just more likely to treat you as in the ways that people treat recreational players. But versus if I've been showing a lot of aggression, if I've been showing, if I've been caught in a few bluffs or showing a few bluffs, that obviously changes the dynamics, and you have to factor in like, oh, the chances of me getting away with a bluff have probably gone down. People are looking to, probably looking to pick me off more. So I think the main thing is just being aware of like what's happened recently in the recent past and what your various opponents think of you. Like they might have very different opinions if they've played with you multiple times and seen what you're capable of, or these kinds of things. I don't think I have any firm prescriptions around like achieving a certain image, because I think it can vary. Different people have different strategies and different people want to portray different images. So I think it just depends on what people are trying to do and what they're comfortable at. I mean, some people try to portray a very professional demeanor and like to stare at their opponents a lot and intimidate them and these kinds of things. And I've never been somebody like that. I'd rather come across as pretty unassuming and relaxed and try to foster a really relaxed vibe, because I think that's how you make people not care as much about the game and more likely to give you their money if they think
right, because they're having fun
relaxed.
and
Yeah.
exactly.
So that's kind of the approach I've taken. But I've almost entirely played cash games, which is a different vibe than tournaments and such. I think a relaxed demeanor and more amateur seeming demeanor is much better for cash games, maybe. But yeah, I don't know if you wanted to talk about something specific, but that's kind of my rough sense of it.
Hey, I have a question for you, real quick. We can come back to that real quick. Just something you said a while ago made me think of it. You're talking about hiding our own tails. You have to be very self-critical in order to even pick out your tails. But how would you start off by, you have to analyze your hands and how you played the hand and what all happened. But how would you start off yourself identifying your own tails? Like, how would you? So instead of asking someone to watch you, how would you identify yourself?
Yeah, I think it's just a matter of trying to key into, say you're bluffing, just really trying to key into what am I doing at this moment in time? Like, where are my eyes pointed? What are my hands doing? How quick am I acting? How quick did I bet? These various things that and these are things that you can learn by reading, like, say, my stuff or other Poker Tells stuff. You can just get a sense of what it is that people are doing and paying attention to that are relevant. So then it's just a matter of when you're value betting or bluffing, or even other situations too, like checking to the razor. How quick am I acting? What am I doing with my hands? Where am I looking? And I think you start, the thing that I started keying into. I mean, I think the main reason that I got interested in tells was because I was good at examining myself and being like, oh, why am I doing this, when I'm bluffing and not when I'm value betting, right? Like the way I'm behaving when I'm relaxed is so much different than the way I'm behaving when I'm stressed out, right? And like noticing the discrepancies and being curious about why I was doing that, and then being like, oh, is this kind of thing present in other people? That noticing that, like, my eyes were, it was much harder to move my eyes freely and relax when I was bluffing, right? Like I just wanted to like stay staring at one little spot and things like this. Just kind of keying into your own feelings and being curious about why they're doing, why you're doing what you're doing. But I think the main thing is just being aware of the various paths there are to leaking information, because I think if you're not aware of the various ways you can leak information, like, bet timing, or, are you shuffling your chips consistently? Or are they freezing up suddenly or something like that? All these little things that might leak information, you just have to slowly go through them and be like, oh, okay, I feel like I'm consistent on these things, or I'm not consistent on these things. Yeah.
How long do you think that, and I know this is going to be a probably a wide range, but how long do you think it would take a person, once, say, I notice in myself that when I have the nuts, I stop shuffling my chips, but I played my chips the whole time. How long do you think it would take, once I recognize that in myself, how long do you think it would take me to break that? Like,
Oh,
what do you think would?
I think it's actually pretty easy to be fairly unreadable. I think it's just a matter of, because I think there's only so many leaks involved, for most people. I mean, most people are trying to be pretty stoic. So I think it's just a matter of shutting off the main sources of leakage. Some people might just have a blind spot or two, that are major leaks. But I think by and large, it's not that hard to be pretty unreadable. I think many people are too scared that they're like leaking information. I think it's harder than people think to. Uh, people aren't leaking as much information as they think because, well, as long as you're trying to make an effort to be pretty stoic, you're probably doing a decent job at it, like enough where like few people would, are getting much from you. Um, but yeah, to answer your question, I do think it's fairly easy once you're aware of the various ways the information can leak.
Okay.
You'll remember, because you'll be like, oh, that's serious. That's a discrepancy. I should watch that, and then you're gonna just be consistent about
Start being
the behavior.
mindful of it.
Probably, yeah. You'll be motivated to be consistent once you
Right.
realize. Yeah.
It's been a while since you, well, it's been a week or so since you dealt with me, but I don't know if you've noticed, but at one point I was like you. I shuffle my chips all the time,
Mm-hmm.
all the time,
Yes.
right? And to one of Zachary's points in his book, if you get in a bind, it's like when you get lost, first thing you do is cut the radio off,
Mm-hmm.
right? So if you get in a bind at the table, first thing you do is slow down shuffling, so you can think better, right? Or at least you think you can think better.
Right.
So I don't know if you've noticed, but now I don't touch my chips here in the hand. Now, if I'm not in the hand, I might pull them out and shuffle them while I'm watching everybody else.
Right.
But when that first card hits the table, my chips go to the stack.
So,
That's it. I'll
yeah.
touch
Well, that's probably a good stance to take, so you're not giving away more
and
information.
every blue moon, I'll catch myself doing it like that.
Yeah, oops.
Relax.
Yeah, I guess because it is kind of hard to fall back into those old habits, especially if you've had them for a long time. You got to make a conscious effort to. But it's nice to know that from an expert like you think that those tells are going to be easily fixable as long as you're conscious of it, as long as you are paying attention to you and what you're doing. It's going to be conscious, and it'll become second nature to you to stop doing those things. So that's encouraging.
Yeah, I think it'd be, if I was less ethical or something, I might be like, no, you'll never get rid of your tells. You really need to study my books.
Study my books, yeah.
But it's like I think I think it's easier than many people think to be fairly unreadable, and then B, I think very few players are actually good enough to where they're reading you that well enough to where it makes a difference. Like, I think some players are quite good at reading tells, but I think most people just aren't paying attention or don't know what they're really looking for. So even in spots where somebody might be like, oh, I got a tell on you, or I read you, it's like, did they really, or are they just they just randomly used a piece of information and it happened to be right. So I think people can be too afraid of getting soul read or something. I just think it doesn't happen, especially in the lower stakes. I don't think it happens that often, and especially people that are soul reading you probably are not going to be telling you, right? So if I think people are a little bit too worried of it in most lower stakes games, especially. Yeah.
Okay.
I agree. We had that conversation kind of like that. It's just from sitting at the table as much as I do, and I pay pretty close attention. But I think that more than half the table is zoned out.
Yeah, we've had this discussion about phones, because I've been guilty of it. We get bored at the table, and now we have these wonderful little computers in our hands, and so we start messing on our phones, but then we miss so much because you can gather so much information when you're not in the hand, when you're watching everyone else, and I think that's part of the art of poker that's been lost because people are on their phone so much. You don't have the table talk, you don't have the observing because people get so distracted. And yeah, we've had that discussion a few times.
We're our own worst enemy.
Yeah, we're on our own worst enemy. Yep, exactly.
Boredom.
Yes.
I mean, if you're playing the way you should, you're going to be bored 80% of the time.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, if you're playing the range, you're playing by the math, you're going to be bored. It's a boring game.
Yeah, I think the nice thing about getting into the tells is that it gives you something to think about, when you're just sitting there. And that was what was always, I can be quite entertained by just paying attention to, like, oh, how is this person betting? Where are they looking this time? How quickly did they bet? And kind of just trying to piece together a few things, even if it doesn't add up to much in the short term. It's something that can keep you entertained, and then you might pick a few things out over the longer term.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a very good point.
You mentioned table talk a little bit earlier. One of us did. So I'm not going to say his name right? Will
Conceal.
Or him, or Tony G sends me right over the edge when I watch him play.
He's fun.
Do you think that's effective? Because we got a few at where I play that will try, not to the degree of these two. They're not they're not that caliber. But there's a couple that will try this kind of stuff, and all I do, I see their mouth move. That's it.
Yeah. Well, I think I actually have a video in my video series about Will Kassouf specifically. So I think a lot of those guys who talk a lot can give away a lot of information with their talk because they aren't really aware of how imbalanced they can be. And like Will Kassouf is a perfect example. Like, he had major patterns when you keyed into them that told you, if you were paying attention, if you played with him, you would. I don't know how much he talks in general. I don't know if he just does that if he's when he's on cameras, or if that's a frequent thing, and maybe he's gotten more balanced with it. But there were just major patterns he had that, like, if you heard certain things from him, were very correlated with certain hand strengths and such. And same with Tony G. Like, Tony G had major patterns too. I could make a video about Tony G because I've noticed major patterns he has, and they're all in keeping with the standard kind of things that also apply to many other players. These aren't even player specific tells; they're just general verbal tells. And some of that stuff is quite common. Like, for example, like goading people more when you have a strong hand. You're more likely to say kind of aggressive Barbie kind of barbs to someone, like kind of insinuating that they won't call, or that they have a weak hand, or these kinds of things. Like, so and you just won't find those nearly as much. You'll occasionally find them when they have weaker hands and bluffs, but you just won't. It's a huge imbalance. And so there's some basic things like that where that just apply to so many verbal tells and talkative people. And a lot of the people, the nice thing about the verbal tells is, like, they're much less known than the physical tells. Like, they're much less known, and so it means that people just aren't as aware about how imbalanced they can be, basically. Yeah.
One of my when I sit down at a poker table, I'm there to have fun. I want everyone there around me to have fun. So I'm the one that I'm drinking, and I'm ordering drinks for the table, and I'm getting everybody talking. And I've noticed that I talk too much and so I've had to cut it back because I've given myself away because I talk too much when I do that. But I'm like one of those ones that I want to sit down and I want to talk and have fun.
Yeah.
Not trying to go to men. I just want to be sociable. So I like the social aspect of it. I love the game, but I like being sociable too. So
and I will say, I write about this in my Verbal Poker Tells book. I think it's you can be talkative during a hand and be balanced. It's like Phil Locke is a good example of that. Like Phil Locke was
Yeah, he
very
is.
he never
Yes.
like I studied him a lot in various when I was writing verbal poker tells, and I thought he was very good at being sociable, being talkative, but like really never giving never
Giving it
giving anything
away.
away that I noticed.
Right.
So you can do these things and it can be fun, and that's what I like to do too. I like to maintain a sociable atmosphere, and you can
Right.
do that. It's just a matter of sort of like the physical tells. It's like being aware of like how you might trip up and give things away. If you're
Right.
aware of those things, you're just it frees you up to talk and not worry about what you might be giving away.
Right. Right. That's something I'm working on.
Yeah.
I'm definitely working on that.
Yeah, you'd like my verbal poker tells book for sure. Yeah, you because
Oh yeah,
you'll be like, oh, I should definitely not do that. Definitely not do that. Yeah.
Oh, I'm excited, Zach. I want us to. I've meant to read your books before we did this, and life got in the way. So I'm reading your books. So I would love to do this again with you after I read them because I'd love to discuss some of them because I'm really excited about reading them.
Yeah,
I really
it's a good bathroom book. Have it put it on the toilet.
Good bathroom book.
It's got a lot of hand examples that you'll recognize from TV shows.
It's
And
a good book. I enjoyed it. My favorite verbal poker tale is this guy that hasn't said a word all night, right? Hardly said anything,
Mhm.
and all of a sudden it says, "I bet 250."
Yeah.
I'm like,
Into a
not to
$30
me,
pot.
yeah, not to me,
Yeah. I love it when they way overbet the pot. It's like, okay, I'm pretty sure you're good.
Yeah, I'm not getting involved.
Haven't said a word, but then they put money in the pot. First time they put money in the pot, and 5 hours.
First time they said a word,
Yeah,
or
first
they
time
look
said a
straight
word,
at it, and especially if they look straight at the dealer and do it. I'm like, I'm folding my set of aces.
Oh,
Yeah.
like he said. Oh, you're saying he announces, "I bet." That's what you were saying,
Yes.
Terry. Yeah, I bet
Yes.
the I bet part. Yeah.
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 You're like, okay, I think I'll stay away. Okay, what?
Okay, I was actually listening to Verbal Poker Tales on my drive up here today, and you were talking about people that talk during hands, and why would they do that kind of thing. Have you ever been in? I haven't. Have you ever been in the hand that what they said or didn't say made you call or fold? Other than I bet 250.
Oh well, yeah. I mean, all the time. I mean, when I don't like I said, I don't play much these days, but I mean, I'd say verbal stuff. After the research I did for verbal poker tells, I actually learned a lot writing that book because I was studying a lot of stuff. And like after I wrote that, like verbal poker tells became like much more reliable and useful for me than physical for nonverbal tells. So yeah, I would often base decisions on the verbal stuff if that's what you're asking. I mean, and I don't know, I can't remember if we talked about it last talk we had, but I have an interesting hand that I played on a live stream in Portland. I think it was the Poker Guys. I think that's what they call themselves, the Poker Guys live stream, and I put it on my YouTube. It was a hand where somebody we were playing 5-10, I think, and they made a pretty small bet. It was a small pot. They made a small bet on the river, and they made a weak hand statement, which is what I call, somebody weakening their range. And I folded for like in a spot where like nobody would ever fold because it would be a ridiculous fold. But, I folded just purely on the statement. And that was entertaining. But that stuff happens pretty frequently where you're just, if that's what you were asking, yeah, that kind of stuff happens
Yeah, you get
frequently. And
that.
we could talk more about that situation more or something else.
Okay.
Yeah. So last question then. What is explain to me, because I was listening to this and I kind of actually I got a little bit confused between reliability and frequency when you were speaking in verbal poker tales. Is there the correlation there, or were you referring to verbal or physical? Because like I said, I was driving and I really didn't never get a chance to go back and look at that.
Yeah, sorry, I can't remember offhand what that was, but I think I was making a point about how Yeah, actually, I can't recall. It's been a while since I thought about that. Sorry if that was in your
That's okay.
No, we
notes.
can probably pick that up on the next
Okay.
next
That's
one
your
we
best
do.
point.
Yeah.
I mean, if we can
Yeah,
talk about
sorry if I missed that in your notes before the show. I must have missed that note and I
that
didn't
one
think
won't
about
on
it.
there.
Yeah, it wasn't
It
on
wasn't on
there.
there.
Oh,
He added
gotcha.
that
Yeah,
one
yeah.
that
today.
that
He
was
added
a
that one
surprise
today.
one just
Yeah,
because
it's been a while
He
since I thought
messing with
about what I even wrote in there. So
I was driving up here and I had Purple Poker
you.
Tales
Just need
playing
to
on
throw one out
Audible.
at you.
you know it better than I do now. So
I know
I just read it more recently than you
yeah,
did.
we had
yeah,
a question. What was the question from? We had a question from on email question. Where was it? There we go. Oh no,
No.
it was where was it? Sorry, he's got a question from a viewer for you.
I can find it.
Promise it's on the notes here. I saw it today. I thought it was down at the bottom. Was it not?
You may well be correct.
Yeah, that is down at the bottom. Oh, yeah, right there. Right there it is, right? Yeah, there you go. Let me read it for you.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Okay. I'm an intermediate player, but have only played online so far. What advice would you give me for playing in live cash games in a card room for the first time? Are live low stakes games still as soft as so many say? I guess the second half that's probably for me, but the first half would be for you.
I would say it can be a little nerve wracking if you're used to playing online and you're transitioning to live. I would say just focus on being comfortable and getting used to the rhythms of it, because it can be a lot to focus on if you're
It'd
not
be
used to.
overwhelming.
Yeah, it can be
Yeah,
overwhelming, and
yeah,
I would say don't think about any, like, you know tells of your own or tells of your opponents. I would just focus on getting comfortable and getting used to the rhythms, and then you'll
yeah. I agree.
once you get used to things, you'll be able to start thinking more about, like, your table presence and tells, or anything else you want to think about. But yeah, I do remember the first time I played live. It was like I think it was like a uh, riverboat in Ohio or somewhere, or close
Was it up there in
next.
Indiana?
It was
Like
Indiana. Yeah,
Rising Sun or
it was one of those
yeah,
things. I just
I
happened to be
played up there
passing
too. Yeah.
through, and I was very intimidated, even though I'd played a good amount online.
Right.
Just small stakes online, and I played also with home games that I'd set up in college and stuff. But that was like my first casino experience, and it was intimidating, even though I felt like I was a decent poker player. It was just like, because it's just getting
And you
used to
sit surrounding.
the formal environment, and the
Right.
people being more serious and such.
The
You know,
language,
the language, the expectations. Yeah, but that's what I'd focus on. Yeah, just getting comfortable.
in my opinion about the soft games, our poker room, yes. Our 1-3 games are very, very soft. They are it's a great little honey hole. I'm not saying the place where it is, but they've got very, very good soft 1-3 games. Very good. And our 2-5 game, well, our 1-3 games play like a 2-5 game, so we have no cap. And our 1-3 games, our 2-5 games play like a 5-10 or bigger. So it's our games are still soft. Our cash games are still soft.
You're gonna
Yeah,
get
it's not.
people calling you to ask you where this is now.
Oh, we'll tell you offline because, by the way, if y'all know where I work, my views are my views and do not represent where I work. Okay.
I don't work, so
Yeah, yeah, you can. Yeah.
not for anybody anyway. Okay, well, that brings us to the end of tonight's live stream. Thanks to both our guests. Beth, appreciate you coming. Zachary, it's always a pleasure. It's always educational to talk to you, and every time I learn more, and that's the same with your books and all. We'll do this again at some point, hopefully.
I'm looking forward. I would really love to do this again with you, Zachary. This was very informative for me, and I can't wait to read your books and then come back and discuss with you.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Terry. Thanks, Beth. Nice meeting you, Beth. Thanks, Terry.
Nice to meet you too.
Thank you. Thanks everyone that joined us tonight. This was recorded, so it'll be available on YouTube for playback. Zachary, I'll send you the link to that. So thanks everybody, and we'll see you guys next time
Bye,
on
everybody.
Pokerrailbird Live.
Bye.
Good night.